We're going to spend the next couple hours or so this afternoon talking about free relief first, and then we will talk about penalty relief. So these are the rules that when we're out there playing golf, these are the frequent rules that we are using. And then when we're refereeing, oftentimes this is what we are helping players with. So as it relates to free relief, we're going to talk about these loose impediments that we have, movable obstructions. We'll see that the relief process for loose impediments and movable obstructions is really similar. A couple differences that we'll want to note, especially as it relates to the potential for a penalty for causing the ball to move. Then we have abnormal course conditions. These are things that, unlike loose impediments and movable obstructions, we can't just lift these things out of our way. We're going to have to take the ball somewhere else and play it from there. Then we'll touch on dangerous animal conditions. We talked a little bit about embedded ball relief in the major changes, but we'll dive in a little bit deeper there. For loose impediments, we want to make sure that we are clear on what the definition is. We're allowed to move these things. All of the items that we're going to talk about in free relief are objects and conditions that the rules don't consider to be part of the challenge of the game. And so we're going to give players free relief from these things. And we take on a little bit of a risk when it comes to these loose impediments and potentially causing our ball to move. So what are we going to do if that were to happen? As we think about loose impediments, these are natural, unattached objects. Largely objects that were once part of the course but have become detached. They are no longer attached to it. Tons of examples that we can think of: leaves, twigs, rocks, sticks. We throw in the dead animals and animal waste, which aren't my favorite, but they're examples. We talked about, as it relates to our putting green rule for those accidental deflections, that some animals are going to be defined as a loose impediment. These small insects like worms, similar, that we can move easily, right? We can kind of pick them out of the ground. We also include the webs and the mounds that they build, right? Anthills are going to be considered to be a loose impediment. But we have some caveats. When are these things not considered to be loose impediments? Well, if they're not loose, right? If we're still attached, we're still growing. That tree branch, the fescue that's growing out of the ground, that hasn't yet become detached. It's still part of the course, so we're not able to move it like we can with loose impediments. Then the last bullet point there, we have when objects are sticking to the ball. Grass clippings are a great example. Those grass clippings that are sticking to the ball, those are not loose impediments. And then we have this idea of when it's solidly embedded, it's not a loose impediment. If you think of some stones in the ground, are you going to be able to flick it out of the ground easily? Or are you going to have to take a tee and go around and around and around that stone to try and get it out? When you go to lift that stone, does it feel like the ground is tugging back when you're trying to remove it? Some good indications that likely we've got something that is solidly embedded. We don't have a loose impediment that we're allowed to move. Call out some special cases, things that are not loose impediments, that sand and loose soil. No matter where it is on the course, it is not a loose impediment. But what are we able to do with that sand and loose soil when it's on the putting green? We can move it. We're allowed to move sand and loose soil on the putting green. It's just not considered to be a loose impediment. And then dew, frost, and water are just kind of their own thing, not loose impediments. Snow and natural ice. Guessing this time of year you guys could get some snow and natural ice out on the course if you're brave enough to go play. Player gets a choosy here. We can either treat this as being a loose impediment, or if it is on the ground for temporary water, we can treat it, if the snow and natural ice is on the ground, we can treat it as temporary water. What that's pointing out is if we have snow on a tree branch that's not on the ground. Only option in that case is to treat it as a loose impediment. So we're free to remove it. We're just not going to be allowed to go drop our ball somewhere else. Spider webs, they're obviously going to be attached to something, but we call out still a loose impediment. We can go ahead and move these out of our way. We're allowed to remove these loose impediments anywhere on or off the course. I think this is an item that still gives players a bit of pause, right? That ball's in a bunker. There's a twig, there's a leaf nearby. They're a little bit nervous. Can they move it? They can. The challenge of being in a bunker isn't about navigating loose impediments that happen to be near the ball. It's can you navigate the sand? Same idea in a penalty area. Typically, we're not able to play the ball as it lies in a penalty area. But if you are, we don't have any special restrictions there. Go ahead, remove those loose impediments that happen to be near the ball. Or if your ball happens to be inbounds, but maybe it's close to out of bounds, and there's some leaves, twigs, branches, whatever it might be out of bounds that you want to move, go ahead. Doesn't have to be on the course. And we can do so in any way. It seems like every fall we start getting questions, can I carry my small battery-operated leaf blower with me? And I'm gonna clean off the putting green. That's okay. We say in any way, not a problem. We'll get to the risk that we take on with loose impediments in just a moment, but any questions so far on what we've talked about? Yes?
What about that big boulder that Tiger moved a few years back?
The Tiger boulder?
Yeah.
So the situation with Tiger, famously at Waste Management, I believe, that boulder was a loose impediment. There's no size restriction on what is a loose impediment, and you are free to get help in removing a loose impediment. So that was all by the book, no special treatment to Tiger. The other piece that's interesting when you think about loose impediments is you can get help, and you can also just break off a piece of a loose impediment. If there's, a storm that comes through and there's a large branch down, if you need to break off just a piece of it to get it out of your way, you can do that. So those are a couple interesting outcomes we have with loose impediments. The natural follow-up here, we're allowed to move these things, but what happens if that ball moves? Two fundamental principles we have in golf is we're going to play the course as we find it, and we're going to play that ball as it lies. So if we cause the ball to move in removing a loose impediment, we're going to have to put the ball back. We need to replace it on its original spot. And generally speaking, we're taking on a risk when it comes to removing loose impediments. These are objects that were once part of the course and have become detached. So if we cause our ball to move, it's going to be a one-stroke penalty in most cases. But obviously the rules are known to enjoy an exception. So we do have exceptions to that general principle. The first being when your ball's on the putting green, there's no penalty. We see this in a lot of places in the rules, but we treat the putting green as being a really special area of the course. We get to do things there that we don't get to do elsewhere. We just mentioned we can move that sand and loose soil on the putting green. If we cause our ball to move due to removing a loose impediment, there's no penalty in that case. We're not taking on that risk. During search is an interesting one. We want the player to find that ball to play it as it lies. So if in the act of searching for the ball and removing loose impediments to search, you cause that ball to move, we don't have a penalty. Go ahead, put the ball back, and play on. Up next is going to be movable obstructions, but any other questions as it relates to these loose impediments, these natural objects?
When it was on that leaf, if you moved the leaf and the ball moved, couldn't you just put the ball right where it would have been if the leaf went down?
Correct. So for that image where we had the ball on the leaf, let's assume we're on the putting green. If you move the leaf and the ball moves, you're just going to replace the ball on the estimated spot right under where it was on the leaf.
Even on the fairway?
If you did that in the fairway, yeah, same thing, but that's going to cost you 1 penalty stroke to do that. I don't think we can remove that leaf without causing the ball to move. Unless you're Houdini, I guess. We'll see a lot of similarities as we talk about these movable obstructions. The key difference is rather than these natural objects, now we have artificial ones. We have man-made objects, and because of that, we don't take on the same risk when it comes to removing these. We're not at risk for getting a penalty for causing the ball to move. We'll look at a special relief process if the ball is either in or on that obstruction. We've got the big picture definition here for obstructions. Obstructions as a whole are any artificial object, man-made object. We have exceptions though, integral objects and then boundary objects. Both of those are their own definition, their own category in the rules of golf. So when we talk about those two types of objects, they're not obstructions. Integral objects, there's going to be any artificial object that the committee decides to treat as integral. It's something that they don't want to give free relief from. Really common to treat walls inside of penalty areas as being integral. Perhaps you have some sort of small commemorative plaque on a tree that you want to treat as being integral. You don't want to give relief from that. The road hole is obviously, the most famous example we have of an integral object. We don't get relief from these things. And then boundary objects. Boundary objects are super important because they're defining the boundary of the course for us. And so we don't get free relief from boundary objects, whether that's a fence out on the course, some white stakes that we've put out. We don't get free relief from these things, and we're going to treat them as being fixed. Because the boundary is so important, even though I can lift a white stake out of the ground, we don't want players doing that. We want to preserve the boundary that we have. We've got these two types of obstructions. We've got movable and immovable. Here we're just going to talk about movable. These are the ones that we can move quickly and easily. We're not going to cause any damage to anything. It's reasonable effort. We can just get it out of our way and keep playing. Again, we've got lots of examples of these obstructions that we put out on the courses: benches, ball washers, trash cans. Player equipment is technically a movable obstruction. We've got lots and lots of these out on the course. If we have, though, a movable obstruction, an immovable obstruction, and part of it is movable, we're going to treat that movable part as being movable. We just have a fence out on the course, it's not defining the boundary, and there's a gate. And I can go up and open and close that gate. It's readily movable. I'm going to treat that part as being a movable obstruction. Or if it's not meant to be moved, perhaps these planks have been there for a while. They might be a little bit loose, but are we supposed to go up and start moving that retaining wall out of the way? No. So if it's not designed to be moved, it is not going to be treated as being movable. Really similar to loose impediments, we're just going to get these out of our way. We can lift them up, move them out of our way, and keep playing. So that's what we're going to do, but we don't have any risk. There's no penalty for causing the ball to move in removing a loose or movable obstruction. And we can move these on or off the course, in a bunker, in a penalty area, in the fairway, on the putting green, wherever you are on the course, you can move a movable obstruction. And same thing, if there's a movable obstruction out of bounds in your way, you can go ahead and move that. We don't need anything to be on the course here. So what happens though if that ball moves? We don't have any penalty, and we are going to go ahead and replace the ball on that estimated spot. And if we don't know the original spot, the rules are going to say, just estimate it and let's replace it there. For a player who's taking relief in this case, they're going to move that rake out of their way. Does that player need to mark the spot of the ball? Are we required to mark the ball here? No. Only required to mark the spot of the ball when you are going to lift it and replace it on its original spot. Now, in a situation like this, if you come up on it and it's pretty obvious that when you lift that rake or the player lifts the rake, that ball's going to move, a good practice would be to mark the spot of the ball. So then that way, when we go to replace it, we know exactly where we're going and it'll help speed things up, but it's not a requirement. Good idea, but just not a requirement. Special relief here that rather than just being against or perhaps near one of these movable obstructions, now the ball is on it. And we want to think about this as the ball isn't touching any part of the course. Different than that ball that was just up against the rake. Part of it was still touching the course. Now this ball has come to rest on some player equipment. It looks like a towel that got left behind, and it's not touching the course. So our relief process is going to be different here. And this is excluding on the putting green. We'll go ahead, lift the ball, get that obstruction out of our way. But now we're going to drop a ball. We're going to take relief. And because we're taking relief, you're allowed to use another ball. You don't have to use that original ball. But we're going to drop in a relief area. And our relief area, we're going to see this pattern repeated, that with the exception of back on the line relief, when we are taking relief, we're going to start with a reference point. Here, the reference point is the spot right under where that ball was on the obstruction. We've got a 1 club length relief area. And then we have some limitations. We're not going to be able to go nearer the hole. And we have to stay in the same area of the course. So here, it looks like we're in the general area, we're in the rough or the fairway, so we're gonna have to stay in the rough or the fairway. If there happened to be a bunker that was within 1 club length of this spot, we're not allowed to drop in that bunker. We've got to stay in the same area of the course. And we almost always see this item. We can't go nearer the hole. If this were to happen on the putting green, we're still going to go ahead and take relief, lift the ball, get that obstruction out of our way. But because we're on the putting green, we're going to place. When we are starting off with a ball on the putting green and taking relief, we are placing the ball rather than dropping it. So we're going to go ahead and just place either the original ball or another one right under where that ball was on the obstruction. We're still taking relief, so just like with the previous situation, we don't have to use the original ball. We could use another one if we wanted to do so.
So you can place it or must place it?
This is a must place when you're taking relief for a ball that is on a movable obstruction on the putting green. Any other questions or items I can clarify for movable obstructions?
So if you got a sprinkler head really close to that boundary between the fairway and the rough, the fairway is still part of the general area. Your drop could actually be in the fairway, even if the ball is sitting on the sprinkler head.
So I do want to clarify, when we talk about a sprinkler head, that's an immovable obstruction, so we'll get to that relief in abnormal course conditions, but we have to remember that the rules consider the rough and the fairway to be the same. So when the rules say stay in the general area, you can go back and forth between those two. So there might be situations where maybe that benefits the player, and it could also go the other way. Player might have to go from fairway to rough. All just depends. Then we have these abnormal course conditions. So now we can't move things out of our way. We're gonna have to take the ball and put it somewhere else. We'll touch on the definition. When are we allowed to take relief from these things? How do we do that? Abnormal course conditions, we often call this an umbrella term. It lets us refer to all 4 of these specific things at once. So we don't have to list them out each time we're talking about them. But we start with an animal hole, and this is pretty simple. It's going to be a hole that has been dug in the ground by an animal. It includes a few other things. We're going to include any dirt that was taken out of the hole as a result of the digging. If there was a bit of a runway or a track leading into the hole or tunnel, that's part of it. And then if you're dealing with a tunnel, any ground that has been pushed up or altered because of that digging, that's all going to be considered an animal hole. I did this presentation, I believe it was last week now, for the Louisiana Golf Association, and it was pretty cool. They had a large number of junior high school players who attended, and one of those players raised their hand as we were talking about abnormal course conditions and these animal holes, and goes, well, what about a crawfish hole? What would that be treated as? And I'm assuming, much like many of you being from the Midwest, I have not seen a crawfish hole. I'm not familiar. So we worked our way through it. I had to try to figure out, well, how big is a crawfish? What is the hole? So the official ruling was that a crawfish is going to be an animal hole and not a loose impediment. But luckily, I don't think you guys are dealing with that too frequently. Then we have ground under repair, which is also an abnormal course condition. And this includes a few different things. Some things are going to be ground under repair by default, meaning committee doesn't have to do anything. This just is ground under repair. Materials that have been piled for removal, those are automatically ground under repair. If somebody's piled up some grass clippings, as long as they're planning to come back for them, that's going to be ground under repair. Now, if they have just been discarded in a dumping ground that a course might have, nobody's coming back for those. That's not ground under repair by default. Any hole that has been made by either maintenance and maintaining the course, if you're doing some sort of project out on the course, that's going to be ground under repair by default. And then broadly, it's just areas that a committee wants to give relief from. It could be something like we see on the slide where it's, abnormal for what the condition of the course is, a bad area. It could be, an area of beautification. You may have flower beds or, an area of nice planting that you don't want players going in and hacking up. You could have maybe a turf nursery that you want to protect. So those are all things the committee could decide to treat as being ground under repair, and we get free relief from them. So an unmarked tractor, tire, rut, whatever it might be, that's not going to be ground under repair by default. It's going to be up to the committee. And the USGA's philosophy, at least at our championships, is it does need to be like a deep tire rut. So obviously some judgment at what point it becomes deep. But if you're just out playing, especially in stroke play only, I should say, that would be a nice opportunity to play 2 balls if you can't get a ruling quickly, and then let the committee look at it and decide if they would have treated it as ground under repair. Then we have immovable obstructions. So this is the reverse of those movable obstructions. We still have man-made objects, but now we can't move them. We can't lift that cart path. We can't lift the sprinkler head and get it out of our way. We're going to have to take the ball and put it somewhere else. The last one on the list is that temporary water that's visible on the surface before or after the player takes their stance. If you've given temporary water relief, I'm sure you've come across the player who's doing this little dance trying to push up some water. If that water is only visible while the player's pushing down on the ground, that's not temporary water. You need that player to place their feet or get out of there, and then let's see if we have visible water. Ground that's, soft, mushy, the water that just kind of temporarily rises but goes away, that's not temporary water. It's got to be visible before or after the stance. We get relief from these things, but in order to get that free relief, we have to have interference. So what is interference? Well, if we have a ball that is either touching, in, or on that condition, we get interference. Same thing for our area of intended stance. Where are we placing our feet and our body for the stroke? Then we have that area of intended swing. Where is that club traveling for the stroke that we're going to make? If the ball interferes with any one of those things, we get free relief. For a ball that is on the putting green only, we also count line of play as being interference, but you have to have a ball that's on the putting green. If my ball's in the rough a couple of yards behind a sprinkler box, doesn't interfere with my lie of the ball, area of intended stance, area of intended swing, it's just on that line of play, I'm not getting free relief in that case. We need the ball to be on the putting green before we look at line of play. If there's a sprinkler head just kind of near where I'm playing, it's distracting me, but I don't have any one of these things that is interference, I don't get free relief in that case. We get free relief anywhere on the course, except when the ball is in the penalty area. We'll see this theme throughout these free relief rules when we're talking about moving the ball, dropping and playing from somewhere else. When the ball's in a penalty area, we don't get free relief. You can either play the ball as it lies, and if you don't like or want to do that option, you can take penalty relief from the penalty area. Those are the options the player has in that case. They're not getting free relief. We need that abnormal course condition to be on the course. If I'm having to stand out of bounds to play my ball that's in bounds, and I'm in an area of temporary water or perhaps on an immovable obstruction that's out of bounds, I'm not getting free relief. Then we have the concept of if the stroke is clearly unreasonable due to something else. We're not going to let the player use this abnormal course condition as a get out of jail free card, if you want to think about it that way. If it is clearly unreasonable to play that ball as it lies, or the player has chosen some sort of stroke, stance, direction of play that is clearly unreasonable, they're just picking that so that they are going to have this interference. If that's the case, the player is not going to get free relief. When you're in this type of situation and you're trying to figure out, is this clearly unreasonable or not? One of the very first questions I would be asking that player is, what would you do if that condition weren't there? If you're dealing with a cart path, look, what would you be doing if the cart path weren't here? How would you play this? That's going to help you really start to get at, is this clearly unreasonable or is it not? If we are allowed to take this free relief, this is then how we do that. We're going to find what we call the nearest point of complete relief. Where is the closest spot to where the ball is at on the course where you could play this stroke without any interference from this condition? And we are only looking at that condition that you're taking relief from. If you're taking relief from a cart path, we are only concerned and only guaranteeing that you are not going to have interference from that cart path. You're not guaranteed to have, a nice or even a playable spot at your nearest point of complete relief. The nearest point of complete relief doesn't change just because the player doesn't like where it takes them. It's not the nicest point of complete relief, it's the nearest. Another good refereeing tip that I'm sure most people have heard is if you come up on a player who's trying to take relief from an abnormal course condition, make sure you caution them not to lift that ball, right? You don't want the player to speed up and lift that ball and then realize relief is going to put them right in the middle of a bunch of bushes and trees, right? Give them that pause to say, hang on, let's see where you're going to go before you lift that ball. I should also note, when we're starting in the general area, that nearest point of complete relief also needs to be in the general area But to follow up on the question we had about the sprinkler head, rough and fairway are both general area. So it's possible for a ball in the fairway, you could have to go into the rough. The reverse is possible. You could be in the rough and have to go to the fairway. It all just depends upon the individual circumstances. Our relief area here is going to be 1 club length. The only time we're going to get into a 2 club length relief area is when you're taking lateral relief. So that's either for an unplayable ball or for a red penalty area. But every other time you're dropping a ball to take relief, you get one club length. We got to stay in that general area, and we can't go any nearer the hole than where that reference point is. We have a concept of we have to take complete relief. So all of those things I spelled out that are interference, we've got to take relief from all of those. Even if my stance was the only thing that had interference from the abnormal course condition, I still have to take relief for the lie of the ball in the area of intended swing. You can't just kind of pick and choose the pieces you want relief from. You have to take complete relief.
Your reference point could possibly be closer to the hole, but your relief cannot be closer to your hole. So if you're in a ground under repair, you're 1 yard from the front of it, but you're 10 yards from any other area, your nearest point of complete relief is actually that 1 yard forward.
No, so the nearest point of complete relief, it can't be closer to the hole than where the ball lies. And so this is, again, it depends upon the geometry, right? Maybe we're moving right, left, behind, depending upon how it shakes out, but you can't go closer to the hole than where the ball lies.
It has to be on the course, can't be OB.
The nearest point of complete relief has to be in bounds, can't be out of bounds. So we also get relief from abnormal course conditions when the ball is in a bunker. Very similar relief process. We're going to find a nearest point of complete relief that is inside that bunker. We've got that same 1 club length relief area. We're going to be limited to the bunker that our ball is in. Can't go any nearer the hole than the reference point. And then we still have to take complete relief, but the thing with bunkers is they're a defined area, right? There's only so many places you can go in a bunker. And that nearest point of complete relief, it can't be closer to the hole. So what if we have some temporary water towards the back of the bunker that our ball is in? We can't take complete relief without going closer to the hole. So at that point, for free relief, we have maximum available relief. This is looking at essentially where is the player going to have the least amount of interference. Still can't go closer to the hole, but effectively, where's the ball going to be in, the least amount of water? And then that's the spot that the player would use if they want to take free relief. So the player always has a free relief option. And keep in mind, the only time we get to maximum available relief is if you can't take complete relief. You don't get to just choose maximum if you have complete relief. This is an option, though, that the player has regardless of whether or not they're taking complete relief or maximum available relief. They can drop outside of the bunker using back on the line for a 1-stroke penalty. They can go to any area of the course except for that bunker that their ball was in. This goes back to the Jay Roberts video that we saw. We have to drop on the line. If we don't drop on the line, we don't have a relief area. But once we do that, that ball can roll up to 1 club length in any direction, including closer to the hole. On the putting green, since we're starting off on the putting green, this is going to be a placing relief procedure. We're going to go ahead and place a ball at that nearest point of complete relief. We're still taking relief, so we can use either the original ball or another one. But that nearest point of complete relief, it's not guaranteed to be on the putting green. It's either got to be on the putting green or in the general area. And if the nearest point of complete relief is in the general area, that's the spot that the player has to use. They don't get a choice to go somewhere else and stay on the putting green. They've got to go wherever that nearest point of complete relief is located. Then if we can't take complete relief for that condition on the putting green, we would still have maximum available relief, which again could either be on the putting green or the general area. If you're not able to take complete relief on the putting green, perhaps a good indication that maybe the course is getting towards being unplayable. May want to consider suspending play in that case. Any questions for abnormal course conditions?
I don't understand the maximum relief. Is that always with a penalty of the stroke, maximum relief? I don't understand that concept at all compared to what you were saying with the complete.
Sure. So I'll just talk through maximum available relief for a ball in a bunker again. It's a free relief option. So if we have a bunker and my ball's towards the back of it and there's filled with temporary water in the back of the bunker, I can't go closer to the hole in establishing that nearest point of complete relief. So it's possible I just don't have a nearest point of complete relief. So in that case, if I want to take free relief in the bunker, I'm going to use my maximum available relief. Where do I have the least amount of interference from this water? I'm still going to have interference from the temporary water, but where is it going to be the least? And that might be where the ball's in the more shallow water, maybe my stance is, and that's going to be the spot I use. And then I'd have one club length from there.
It just doesn't sound very maximum to me.
If you're getting to maximum, it's not an ideal situation because you're not getting complete relief. Yeah.
In that situation, would the maximum technically be closer to the hole?
No, so maximum available relief can't be closer to the hole.
So what if the situation is the entire back half of the bunker is full? You can't go close to the hole, but you can't take relief in the bunker. What do you do at that point?
So in the event of the back of a bunker is filled with temporary water where your ball is, you have some sort of maximum available relief. It probably isn't great or ideal, but you do have that free relief option. But that would be a situation where a player's probably more likely to want to use the back on the line for one penalty stroke.
Or if the bunker's full, there's water in the entire bunker.
So if an entire bunker is filled with water, it's the same thing where we've got maximum available relief where you could drop outside for one penalty stroke. Depending upon, the event that you're running and your weather forecast, if you know, hey, the bunker on hole 15 is known to fill with water really quickly, you could elect to treat it as being ground under repair. So that's an option and something to consider depending upon course and forecast.
Just a question, you started a tournament round, people finished the round, it rains really hard, so bunker fills full of water, some guy hits the ball in the water, in the bunker. Is he still gonna be able to get, are they gonna be able to keep that around and repair in the middle of the round after other people play?
No. So if you've started the round and that entire bunker was not declared to be ground under repair, the committee really shouldn't be then treating it as ground under repair. Because what that does is when you say an entire bunker is ground under repair, we then treat it as being part of the general area. And so then you effectively get out of that bunker for free. So that's what I was trying to allude to with, depending upon the course you're at and weather forecast, that would be something to be thinking about. Okay. We have a special relief option for a ball that is not found, but it is known or virtually certain to be in an abnormal course condition. Knowledge or virtual certainty is a standard that we use in a number of places in the rules. We use it, probably the best example is with penalty areas. To take relief from a penalty area, there's got to be knowledge or virtual certainty. That's where the ball is. And it's a high standard to get to. It's not just assuming, guessing, wanting something to have happened. We need some pretty conclusive evidence. we've got to effectively be 95% certain that this is what happened. So 95% certain that the ball is lost in one of these abnormal course conditions. If you meet that standard, the rules are going to give free relief to that player. But because the ball isn't found, where are we going to start from? We'll identify the spot that the ball last entered that abnormal course condition and pretend that the ball lies there. So if my ball is lost in temporary water and it's known or virtually certain to be there, I'm going to estimate where did the ball last enter the temporary water. I'll pretend that that's where the ball is and then take relief from there. So from that point, I'm going to figure out where is my nearest point of complete relief. And wherever you estimate the ball last entered that abnormal course condition, whatever area of the course is, that's then how you're going to take relief. So if this is in a bunker, you're going to use the bunker relief procedure. If this happens in the general area, you're going to use the general area relief procedures. I mentioned that this is a high standard to get to. We're not assuming something. So if we don't meet that 95% certainty, you don't have that free relief option. At that point, if the ball isn't found within 3 minutes, we just have a lost ball. So you don't get that special relief procedure, and stroke and distance is going to be the only option for the player at that point. They got to go back and play again from where they last played from.
They could have played a provisional if they know that's going to happen, correct?
We'll get to the provisional ball rule, but if a player thinks the ball might be lost outside of a penalty area, yes, they can play a provisional, and then that's what they would continue on with. One of the principles I've talked about with the rules of golf is playing the ball as it lies, and these no play zones are a bit of an exception to that. Most of the time, the player always has that option to play the ball as it lies, unless they have interference from a no play zone. And it's up to the committee in charge of the course or competition to decide what, if anything, is a no play zone. It could be an area that, due to environmental reasons, you want to protect. It could be the really beautiful flower bed near the clubhouse that you don't want players to hack up. It could be perhaps you have a steep cliff or some sort of, potential dangerous area that you want to keep players safe from. But you've defined this area that you don't want players to play from. So when they have interference from that abnormal course condition, no play zone, they have to take free relief. You don't have the option to play the ball as it lies. So we will touch on dangerous animal conditions, what these are, when we're allowed to take relief, and how do we go about doing that. So when an animal is close enough that it could cause physical harm to the player. We give some examples in the rules of what could be considered a dangerous animal condition. I know sometimes people will see the poisonous snake on that list and then, get a little wrapped up in that and think, well, what about a regular snake? I'm personally not going to take any risks to try to figure out whether or not a snake is poisonous or not. We can go ahead and give relief. This is a rule that typically we're going to be perhaps a little bit generous to the player, right? There's a potential cause for physical harm. Let's err on the side of caution and make sure that we get this player somewhere safe that they can play from. Fire ants is one that I run into quite a bit at our championships, especially when we get down towards the south. And again, if we know we're somewhere where there are fire ants, and that's something, to check in with the superintendent at the course, are there any fire ants or other animals that we should be aware of? And if the answer is yes, and we're dealing with an anthill that looks like it could be fire ants, that's good enough for me, right? Let's go ahead and give relief and get the player somewhere safe. Worth noting here that things like poison ivy, poison oak, jumping cactus, if you're out in Arizona, those aren't dangerous animals. We gotta have an animal to have a dangerous animal condition. So we don't give free relief from those types of things.
What about a nasty playing partner?
No relief from that, unfortunately. Different than what I said with abnormal course conditions, because we're dealing with a dangerous animal and this physical harm is at risk, we're going to give relief anywhere on the course, including when a ball is in a penalty area. We have that same exception though, that look, if the stroke is clearly unreasonable, you're not getting free relief. I can't hit my ball into the middle of a pond, have it be 10 feet underwater, and then say, well, there's an alligator right near that and I can't play it as it lies. It's clearly unreasonable. I'm not getting free relief. Or if somehow the player has only created this interference through a selection of play, stance, swing, whatever it might be, that's clearly unreasonable for the circumstances. But again, if there's some reasonable risk to the player, let's go ahead and be reasonable and get him somewhere safe. So how do we take relief? We're going to see a similar relief process to abnormal course conditions. Where is the nearest, safest spot for that player to play from? We're not going closer to the hole, but we're going to find that nearest, safest spot, and we're going to start from there. And we borrow from our abnormal course conditions. So if this is in the general area, we'll find the best spot, safest, nearest spot in the general area to play from. Bunker, we're going to have those options. Not quite sure what a dangerous animal situation would be on a putting green, but we're ready. The penalty area, this is where we have to detail how do we take relief. For free relief, the player is going to have to stay in that penalty area if they want to take free relief. Nearest point of complete relief, that entire 1 club length relief area is all limited to that penalty area. But if the player doesn't like where that spot takes them, perhaps it's not even playable, they've got the option to take relief from the penalty area for that 1 penalty stroke. So they're not bound to take free relief. It's just an option that's there for the player. Any questions for these dangerous animal conditions? Okay. We touched on embedded ball relief earlier with the major changes as it relates to that reference point where we're going to start from, but we'll backtrack a little bit to talk about when a ball is embedded, where we're able to take that free relief, and how do we go about doing that. For a ball to be embedded, it needs to be in its own pitch mark as a result of that previous stroke. And part of that ball needs to be below the level of the ground. The ball doesn't necessarily have to break through the ground and be touching soil. We can see in that bottom image, there's some leaves, grass kind of intervening between the ball and the soil, but that ball is below the level of the ground. So that player would have an embedded ball and would be able to take free relief. Things that are not considered to be an embedded ball. If I accidentally step on my ball, or perhaps I run over it with a cart while I'm searching, that is not an embedded ball. Now we have other rules that are going to jump in and handle that situation, but it's not an embedded ball. If the ball never got airborne, same thing, that we can't have an embedded ball. Hopefully, with dropping from knee height, it's less likely that a ball would embed when it is dropped, but if it were to happen, not an embedded ball that we would get free relief from. I mentioned with the embedded ball that it has to be the previous pitch mark, the stroke, or the pitch mark from the previous stroke. So that kind of leads to this question, well, how do I know if it's my pitch mark or somebody else's? And as long as it is reasonable to conclude that it is your pitch mark, you can go ahead and take free relief from it. That brings us to this relief process that we've seen. We're going to start with our reference point, which is right behind where that ball is embedded. And again, that has to be in the general area. Most of the time, it's going to be, but there might be some situations where we're going to have to move a little bit. We've got 1 club length. Can't go nearer the hole than our reference point. And we've got to stay to the general area as we take that relief. An exception though for a ball that is embedded in sand. We don't get relief for a ball that is embedded in sand. We can see up here one of these courses with a natural waste area, these naturally sandy areas. When you get down to that Pinehurst area, it's really common that the second you get off the fairway, it's all sand. We hosted our Women's Open last year at Pine Needles, and that was very much the case. Once you got outside the fairway, it was sand. And so we don't get relief in that case because we're in sand in an area that is not cut to fairway height or less. Also not going to get free relief if something other than that embedded ball makes the stroke clearly unreasonable. You know, in this case, it looks like that tree is interfering so much that this player can't play that ball whether or not it was embedded. And if that's the case, we don't get free relief for the embedded ball. In the event of a ball being embedded on the putting green, we still get relief. It's just not directly through the embedded ball rule. So what the player is going to be able to do is mark and lift that ball, repair that pitch mark, and then they're just going to go ahead and replace the ball on that spot that they lifted it from. So we still get relief, it's just different how we take it. Any embedded ball questions?
Is that one on the green just apply to the hole you're playing?
Oh, good question. Yes, so when we refer to the putting green, it's the putting green for the hole that you are playing. So if your ball is embedded on what we would call a wrong green is technically part of the general area. So you would get relief, but the other piece to keep in mind is you can't play from a wrong green. So you also have that interference to potentially take relief from.
Are you allowed to clean your ball if it's embedded?
Yes, so if you are taking relief for an embedded ball, you can clean that ball. And again, not on the putting green. You could use another ball if you wanted to.
If you land on a wrong green, you can't play it, so you're going nearest point, no closer again, and doing the, okay.
Correct. If your ball is on a wrong putting green or it interferes with stance or swing, you're going to find a nearest point of complete relief, 1 club length, no closer to the hole, and play from there.
And 1 stroke.
No, it's free relief from a wrong green. We don't want players playing from a wrong green. Try to protect them for our superintendent friends. Yeah.
I actually, back on the animal question,
Yeah.
what happens if a squirrel takes your ball?
So we have a squirrel that has picked up the ball and run away with it. So that's going to fall into our ball at rest moved rule. And so if an outside influence, which is what that animal is, moves your ball at rest, you're going to replace it on that estimated spot. And if the squirrel has run off with your ball and you can't get it back, you can use another ball. Yeah, so question related to preferred lies with bad weather coming where, you know, first half of the wave is going to have a great day to play and the second half it's going to be brutal. Preferred lies has to be in stroke play in effect for the entire round for everybody. So if you start the round without it, you can't add it partway through the round. So that's one of those situations where committee, you know, working with whatever weather information they have available is going to have to make a judgment on whether or not they want to start the round with it, even though it might be beautiful for the first 3-4 hours.
So would there be any necessarily guidance other than,
No specific guidance. I mean, committees in general, they have a lot of judgment and responsibilities and things they have to figure out. The committee procedures section in the back of the official guide, it gives the committee different things to think about, before the competition, if certain situations happen during the competition, how you should try to handle it. And so if you're ever part of a committee, trying to be as thorough as possible as you're getting ready for the event is ideal.
and you could give preferred lives for the second round, even if the first round hasn't finished, they just can't play preferred lives until after they finish, correct?
Correct. If you have a multi-round competition, you can't adopt preferred lives mid-round, but if you want to adopt it just for round 2, you can do it just for round 2.
Okay.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of free relief.